In August of 1983, the city of Glasgow was shaken by one of the most brutal and puzzling murders in Scottish history. A man was found mutilated beyond recognition. The weapon was chillingly simple but devastatingly effective, a cheesewire. From that moment on, the unknown murderer would be forever remembered as the Cheesewire Killer. 4 decades later, the case remains unsolved, a grim shadow in Scotland's criminal history. The victim was 44-year-old John Johnston. Friends and acquaintances described him as a quiet, dependable man who lived a modest, almost unremarkable life. He worked simple jobs, spent evenings in the local pub, and lived without making enemies. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He was an ordinary man. But his ordinary life ended in extraordinary horror, leaving behind questions that no one has ever been able to answer. On the night of August 22, 1983, Johnston left a pub in the Bridgeton area of Glasgow. Bridgeton, like much of the east end of the city, was tough in those years. Glasgow in the early 1980s was a place struggling with unemployment, poverty, and the scars of economic decline. It was a city where violence often lurked just around the corner. For Johnston, that night would be his last. It was late, and the streets were slick with rain. Witnesses saw him walking alone, heading in the direction of his flat. He was slightly tipsy, but still steady on his feet. To the people who watched him disappear into the dark, it was just another man heading home after a night at the pub. No one could have imagined the fate that awaited him. Hours later, his body was discovered in a deserted lot. The scene was horrific. Johnston's neck had been savagely cut with a cheese wire, a tool designed to slice cheese, but in the hands of a killer, turned into a weapon of unimaginable cruelty. The wounds suggested rage, precision, and brutality all at once. Detectives who arrived at the scene, hardened men who had seen countless murders, later admitted it was one of the most gruesome killings they had ever witnessed. The investigation began immediately, but from the start, it was riddled with difficulties. Heavy rain had fallen overnight, washing away much of the evidence that might have been left behind. Forensic science in 1983 was not what it is today. DNA profiling had not yet become a standard tool, and investigators were forced to rely on fingerprints, fibers, and eyewitness testimony, none of which were available in this case. No murder weapon was ever recovered. No clear fingerprints. No witnesses who saw or heard the attack. Detectives tried to reconstruct Johnston's final movements. They questioned pubgoers who had seen him leave, spoke with neighbors who might have spotted something, and interviewed known criminals in the area. Glasgow, after all, was a city where gang violence was rife. The brutality of the murder led some investigators to suspect the underworld. A killing with a cheese wire was not only unusual, it was theatrical, shocking. It sent a message. But there was one problem. John Johnston had no ties to gangs, no debts, no enemies anyone could identify. So why was he killed? Theories began to form. Some detectives leaned toward the idea of a robbery gone wrong. Johnston's wallet was missing, which suggested theft. But was the theft the motive, or just an afterthought? Was his killer trying to cover their tracks? Or had someone else stumbled across his body later and taken it? Others argued the crime was too deliberate to be random. A cheese wire is not something most people carry with them. This was not a kitchen knife grabbed in anger, or a blunt object used in a scuffle. This was a weapon chosen in advance. To some investigators, it meant the attack had been planned. It was personal. It was personal. But personal by whom? Johnston was not known for fights, grudges, or affairs. His life, as far as anyone knew, was simple and uneventful. Rumors circulated through Glasgow's darker corners. Some whispered about a violent local criminal who was known for carrying a cheese wire and using it as a weapon of intimidation. Others speculated that Johnston had crossed the wrong person without even realizing it. But when police pressed for solid evidence, nothing tied these rumors to the crime. Leads dried up. Witnesses contradicted one another. And soon, the investigation began to stall. Meanwhile, the press gave the case a name that would stick for generations: the Cheesewire Killer. Newspapers splashed the nickname across front pages, stoking fear and fascination in equal measure. Glasgow residents shuddered at the thought of a killer lurking in the shadows, armed with a cheese wire and a willingness to kill in the most brutal way imaginable. For weeks, the public braced themselves for the possibility of another attack. Would the Cheesewire Killer strike again? Would the city be terrorized by a string of gruesome murders? But no second victim ever came. Johnston's killing stood alone, isolated, brutal, and deeply mysterious. As time passed, the case went cold. Detectives continued to revisit it, hoping new evidence would surface, but none ever did. Johnston's family mourned without closure, left with only haunting questions and a grief made worse by the lack of justice. The mystery deepened with every passing year. Why was John Johnston targeted? Was it truly random, a chance encounter with a violent stranger? Or was it a calculated execution, carried out for reasons we may never understand? And why use a cheese wire? Was it chosen for convenience? Or was it meant to instill fear, to leave behind a signature so unique that it could not be forgotten? Decades later, forensic science has advanced dramatically. Cold cases from the 1980s have been cracked open by DNA profiling, uncovering killers once thought untouchable. But John Johnston's murder has stubbornly resisted resolution. Perhaps there is no evidence left to analyze. Perhaps the rain that night truly erased everything. Or perhaps the truth lies buried in police files, waiting for someone to make the right connection. Some believe the killer was a criminal who has since died, taking his secret to the grave. Others speculate that the Cheesewire Killer is still alive, blending into ordinary life. The memory of that night locked away in silence. The story of John Johnston is more than a single man's tragic death. It is a story about silence, the silence that follows an unanswered crime, the silence of a family robbed of justice, and the silence of a city forced to live with a killer who was never caught. And so we are left with questions. What drives a person to kill with such savagery? Was it chance, or something personal, dark, and hidden from public view? And most haunting of all, will we ever truly know who the Cheesewire Killer was? This is the story of Scotland's most brutal unsolved murder, the mystery of the Cheesewire Killer. This is Case Unknown, where cold cases refuse to stay buried. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more haunting mysteries. And don't forget to like the video to support real crime stories that deserve to be heard. Drop your theories in the comments.